Human beings are a curious, inquisitive, exploratory species. I think that has been the secret of our success as a species.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We are the explorers. We have a need to find what is out there. It is a drive inside each and every one of us. The drive to wonder, to push the boundaries, and to explore. Right now, men and women are working on the next steps to go farther than we have ever gone before. New vessels will carry us, and new destinations await us. Everything we have ever accomplished leads to this moment in time, where exploration will now take us to the planets and the stars. Our nearest neighbors in the night sky have beckoned us, invited us, dared us to reach for them. We are the explorers. Throughout our history, we have taken both small steps and giant leaps in that pursuit.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff. Liftoff. 30 minutes after the hour.
So welcome everybody from Comic-Con at home. We're excited to invite you to be part of our Space Teams panel. It's an exploration of solving real NASA problems with virtual simulations and competitions. And I'm really excited to have a bunch of the partners available to talk to you about Space Teams. I'm Mark Murphy, and I'm the producer of Future Tech Live, and also one of the partners in Space Teams. Let me introduce Dr. Greg Chamitoff. Greg is the director of Texas A&M's Aerospace Technology and Research and Operations, which is ASTRO, very cool name. And he's also partner in Space Teams. We have Jackie Carpenter, the founder of One Giant Leap Australia. So we're getting global coverage on this. And then also Tim Urban, who is the director of the Texas Space Grant Consortium, which is would you say affiliated with NASA? Or how would you describe that, Tim?
Yes, yeah. So our funding comes from NASA's Office of STEM Engagement.
Excellent. Okay, so Greg, why don't you talk a little bit about Space Teams yourself? Greg's a former NASA astronaut and spent time on the International Space Station.
Sure. Yeah, that's right. I'm currently a professor at Texas A&M as well, and left NASA 2013. For 15 years before that, I was an astronaut and spent almost 200 days on the space station, a couple of shuttle flights. And, and part of that experience was really one of the great things, that I felt that was part of those missions was the outreach we did to kids from space, talking to schools from space, and engaging with kids directly from space. And so, as part of that, I actually started a robotics competition that is still ongoing that has to do with kids programming robots in space. And so that's maybe part of the reason where space teams came from. But as a professor at Texas A&M, I have a lab that you already mentioned, the ASTRO lab. And so there's two parts to this, really. One of them is the software, which we call spacecraft, capital CRAFT, kind of like Minecraft. And the idea of that software was really to make it possible for anybody around the world to collaborate and be part of the humanity's venture into space and contributing to it. So it's a collaboration simulation online platform, and it has real physics in it. So it's a virtual reality, but also includes physics models and engineering models of real systems. So you actually could build real spacecraft and have a crew member in a real spacesuit using real tools on a real planet, and using the data from NASA, and all the probes that we've sent out to model the planet, and so within that platform we can do real mission design work and real mission analysis work, and in the end, so Space Teams is a STEM version of that, where students can use the platform to do designs for space missions and compete with each other.
It's kind of cool because it gives a broader sense of space exploration. You're talking about deep space. So it's not just really sort of Mars or moon centric. It really allows the innovation and students to be creative and think about propulsion and ways to kind of, get beyond even, our solar system theoretically.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately that's true. The current version that we have, that we're running currently now, Space Teams, it's kind of a particular mission, but it covers all the aspects of space missions. So, you have to, first design your spacecraft, and it actually has to work. It has to be able to keep you alive for the duration of the mission and get to where you're trying to go. All the different things you mentioned, like, propulsion and life support and thermal control, and these things actually have to work. And so when the students design their ship, it's actually being evaluated based on all of these things. Then when they get to the place that they're visiting, in this case for Space Teams this year, it was a rogue planet passing through our solar system that we're trying to visit. You want to get there and land on the planet and build a habitat, and we call it in situ resource utilization, but it's living off the land. It's basically using the resources there to continue the mission as long as possible. Sustainability is another, kind of favorite word for that. And so the students are trying to create their habitat and make their environment sustainable so they can live there as long as possible.
Now, Jackie, we did an early mission with One Giant Leap utilizing the simulations. Can you talk a little bit about One Giant Leap yourself and how that engagement went with the students?
And One Giant Leap Australia provides unique life-changing opportunities to everybody, and we work with all levels of community, industry, education institutions, government. So Space Teams is a perfect thing for us, being such a large country, hard to get around. Being able to provide a virtual space mission to interested students means that we can outreach right into those really remote areas that normally take a long time to get to or are really hard to service. So because this is a unique thing, Space Teams and the whole idea around working together as a team is really, really important. And distance can cause those kind of issues, But if you pull everyone together to have a common problem to solve, you find that kids from all over the place will get engaged with it. So Space Teams fits perfectly into some of the programs that we already run at One Giant Leap. One of them, we have over 280 schools at the moment that are going to grow space wattle seeds. So little did I know that Greg had taken wattle seeds to the space station in 2008, and then One Giant Leap got given the opportunity to send seeds to space. So I chose wattle without realizing that Greg had already done that, which was awesome. So we're just waiting now for the seeds to come back from Japan, and then we're about to send them out to 280 odd schools in the country to grow this space wattle. So it's perfect because we're building teams. So these teams, then we can talk about, maybe you want to do a virtual space mission. So to us, it's a hand-in-hand program, but it's an amazing program that engages everybody, not just the kids or the students doing the program, but it captures the imagination of their parents as well. And we believe parents and the broader community need to understand how important it is to work in this collaborative space, but also in the space, for them to engage and understand that there's jobs for everybody in this the new space era.
It's interesting because when you think about like the different student skill sets, you know, people tend to just go to, well, you need to be really great at science, you need to be really great at math. But honestly, it's about creative thinking and it's about team and problem solving. So it really does, you know, allow for students with a lot of different skill sets to really kind of contribute and, you know, do things that are very innovative within, you know, within space exploration and creating solutions.
But it also allows kids of different age groups and different backgrounds and cultural backgrounds to work together, because that's what we need to do for the future of the industry, is to make sure that we are all talking together, that we are listening to each other, and that we can solve these problems together.
Now, Tim, you've gone through the demo as well, and the Texas Space Grant Consortium is one of the partners in the space team's missions. Now, for you, like when you think about working with students, and where do you see the connective crossover for you in the work that you do with the consortium?
So Texas Space Grant Consortium is one of 52 consortiums across the United States. So every state, Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico has a space grant. And as I mentioned, the funding comes from NASA's Office of STEM Engagement, and every single state provides K through 12 space education, STEM education, scholarships, fellowships, NASA internships. So nationwide, wherever you're at, you'll be able to work on your space grants projects. And for Texas, we've supported space teams as well as the college students that Greg has working behind the scenes on the spacecraft software. So it really spans K through 12 through college for the Texas Space Grant.
That's really cool. That's really exciting. As we think about like, you know, obviously the first mission revolves around a rogue planet. As we think about like the different ways that that the space, would say the space industry is growing, what opportunities do you see moving forward for students? Where can they engage? I know that there are obviously like different things that are happening. There's asteroid mining, there's all kinds of different things, and we cover some of those things in space teams. Don't necessarily get into asteroid mining so much, but we do get into the idea of habitat creation, you know, you know, some of the ideas around planet formation and terraforming and those kind of things. But what do we think, like what are some of the exciting things that students can look forward to or challenge themselves with as the space industry continues to grow? That's open to anyone. I can keep riffing about, you know,
I was going to say
different things I think are cool.
Resource utilization, you know, what you've got available to you is all you've got, you know. So that whole innovation around this is it, this is the pile of things you have, therefore you have to survive with them. You can't just kind of purchase more down from Walmart or the local shopping center.
You know, it's interesting because you look at like a company like Bigelow Aerospace, right? And their mission really, in some regards, is to be sort of like the trading post in space. You know, that's initially some of the thought processes that they had, was to create sort of outposts on Mars, outposts on the moon, where folks that were coming out maybe to spend longer terms there would have the opportunity to go over to the Bigelow trading post, if you will, to get some of the things that perhaps they had neglected to pack from home or run out of during their, you know, during their stay on in space. Now, when you think about resource management and things, we think about like the Martian growing potatoes, right? What are the sort of like, when we think about organics in space, what do we think about, like what could grow in space? Like what kind of things do we look at like on space teams and like that we could theoretically grow in habitats and things in space?
One of our,
Go ahead.
So one of Texas Space Grant's flagship programs is called Design Challenge. And we have undergraduate teams from across the state working on engineering projects that NASA Johnson Space Center engineers have proposed. One of those topics was, what would you do for food on Mars? And this team this last spring came up with a closed system where they had tilapia that they would bring with them. They
Nice.
would freeze the eggs, bring those, and then they had a vegetable garden on top of that. And it was a closed system where you could eat the fish and the vegetables at the same time.
That's very cool. That's very cool.
And in our wattle, happened to the wattle program, wattle seeds happen to be bush tucker. And so you can look at that. But we've also got the Asian herb in space program that we're running, where we have a few hundred kits of basil being grown. There's a ground control experiment for a JAXA experiment that was done in February. So we're looking at those kind of things, but we're also, one of the questions here at One Giant Leap, the next thing we want to look at is, can we send bees to space? And if we send bees, because we need fruit and all those things, should we send bees that aren't in a hive? Should we send a hive of bees? Do we need those things? How can we do all of that stuff without bees? What if an astronaut's allergic to bee stings and they accidentally got stung by a bee? How would that all happen? So when you look at it, it's quite a complicated thing. So we were looking at that and going, how do we pollinate plants to get fruit if we are going to go and live somewhere else? And are bees the answer? Maybe we need robotic bees. I don't know.
Indeed, that's very cool. That's very interesting, because it's like, you think about like solutions that are happening on Earth, like around things like creating robotic dolphins and robotic, creatures to basically be in zoos and aquariums, and essentially sort of replace the idea of having actual animals within captivity, that you can create really, really smart and clever robotic versions that people can study and learn from and not have to keep the animal in captivity. So that's very interesting. I mean, we think about like nanotechnology, we think about those kind of things when we think about space, and the opportunities that nanotech could provide. When we think about like the challenges that are within space teams, I know that I got some feedback from different folks that loved literally landing the craft. Like that was one of their favorite challenges, and it seems rather simple, but it's not. And it's really kind of great that that space teams combines the idea of creation, but also, really kind of trying to master the environment and the challenges and things that can happen when we're away from Earth. Now, Greg, did you ever get a chance to actually pilot, or you didn't really, did you get a chance to pilot a space shuttle?
Well, in orbit, doing some maneuvers, we're all pushing the buttons occasionally. But generally, no. Generally in simulations, we got a chance to do it, but there's a, pilot and commander that, that gets to it. That's why we brought an actual astronaut pilot into space teams to speak to the kids, because that person knows the difference between, an airplane and a spaceship, and what it takes to fly a spaceship, down to a planet, because they've actually done that. And and you're, like you said, it is different, right? When you're in orbit, you don't have the atmosphere, involved, and when you're close to landing, you do. And so somehow it transitions from one to the other, over the course of the entry, and that's what kind of makes it challenging. In fact, the kind of the way we set it up in space teams, if you don't take advantage of the aero braking and don't take advantage of the atmosphere, you can't land. You don't have enough fuel to land it. But it was great to have an actual pilot astronaut talk about this to the kids. That was fantastic.
Greg, I remember, Greg, there was an email trail in the mission we just did between you and one of the mentors who was tearing his hair out because he couldn't land his spaceship. So it's not just the kids, right? So here's a mentor, right? And Greg's going, oh, this is what you got to do. It is hard. So Greg's trying to give him instructions. Forget the child. This was about the mentor.
Yeah, we got some emails from some of the parents and mentors that were really thrilled about their landing when they were able to do it. Exactly. I was gonna say, one more on the other topic that you already brought up, but with regard to resources, we talked about the plants, growing our own food and all that. But some of the other resources are what's really, critical for making it possible to do these missions as we go further out into the solar system, and basically obtaining all the resources we need. So, things that are for life support, like oxygen, water, right? And whether you can get those from the environment where you're at, or make them out of things that are in the environment that you're at. Like, for example, there's an experiment right now called MOXIE on the Perseverance rover that's extracting oxygen right out of the atmosphere of Mars. And the Mars atmosphere is not oxygen; it's mostly carbon dioxide. But that device has a reaction that makes it possible to extract the oxygen out, and that's for something we're going to need for humans to live on Mars and in other places. So oxygen, energy, water, getting these things out of the environment, and then building materials. For now we have to bring our habitat with us, and that's really heavy, and then it's very limited. But if you really want to construct, a more complex, more interesting, more capable, habitat for humans on another planet, using the local resources to build is a whole nother level of evolution for us.
It's an interesting crossover because Mars City Design was one of the participants, has been a participant in space teams, and so I'm not sure how in depth the discussion got within the the resources, but it would seem like that's obviously, like you're saying, the key elements are energy, oxygen, figuring out also how to are you using 3D printers, what are you doing to to create even things like replacement screws or what have you.
Yeah, that was a fascinating talk from Vera Miliani from the Mars City Design, because so she talked about those aspects you just mentioned, but also when you think about designing a habitat on another world, the environment of that world and how you would live there and what you would do there also impact the thought process of how you would design the facilities. Also using the local landscape in a smarter way. In other words, you wouldn't just build a four-sided house, with an A-frame roof and stick it on Mars. There's reasons to use the geometry, and the topology of the landscape. Understand that there's a lower gravity that affects the way you build the structure, and when the atmosphere is different, and so all these things figure into moon or planet, whatever it is, that local environment is going to have an impact on what makes sense, for the design of a habitat. And she talked a lot about that, which was really cool.
That's very cool. I know that we were involved in, we went to this this one meeting that was a bunch of companies essentially pitching ideas about, different things they were looking for investment in space. And one of the ideas was really kind of steam compression propulsion, but it begged the question quickly, well, where are you going to continue to get water if you need to go deeper into space? Like what exactly, where do those assets come from? And, when we think about that, when we think about like Mars and stuff, like what do we think about as far as like water and, creating sort of those solutions around being able to grow, plants and things?
I'll jump in unless you guys want to. All right. Well, it's just kind of be a stepping stone approach, but the exciting thing is we know about water on the moon and we know about water on Mars. The South Pole, the poles of the moon have got these permanently shadowed regions that are, we know that there's in some form there's water there that we hopefully can extract and use. And so that, some of the early missions that are coming up here are all about figuring out how to mine the water on the moon and then use it, use it locally to support a base, but then potentially use it to supply, vehicles that are going much further than the moon, and sending that resource up into space, because it's easier to get mass off the moon than to get it off the Earth. We get to Mars, we can see from here the poles. We know that's water ice on the poles, and that, well, in the North Pole anyway. And then sometimes I think on the South Pole also. But so we know that the water is there. We know that there's a lot of evidence of water erosion on the surface. So and we've done some experiments now where we have we know there's water in the soil over the surface of Mars. So water will be something we'll be able to extract from the environment on Mars. Other places are a lot different. I mean, from Europa, which is all covered with water ice everywhere, to other places where it'd be very hard to find water. I may have to make it out of hydrogen, oxygen, which we extract out of other chemicals. So it's it'll be a real evolution figuring out how to do this in different places.
I've seen some plans for a North Pole Mars colony where it's robotic, it all opens up, but they inject the water into the walls and the walls freeze solid, so that you've got a solid structure on the outside for when the astronauts arrive. And then that way you've got something to start with. So this injection of water, which we know is there, and then using the temperature to freeze the walls solid, that could be a really good concept because it's really simple.
Mm.
I know one of the other things that we play with in space teams is really kind of the construction of planets. And one of the things I think that's been so fascinating is as we hear about different exoplanets that are being discovered and the composition of those exoplanets, that there could be exoplanets that are made entirely almost of diamond or different minerals and elements that would be even foreign to what we're used to seeing. When we think about like planetary construction or conception, what are the things that are most interesting when you're thinking about conceiving a planet, or what things are most compelling in a planet's construction?
Yeah, well, you're right that in space teams we actually build the planets, right?
Exactly.
As if we have God's perspective and we can just pick the composition and stick it in the orbit we want and put it at the right distance from the sun and choose the properties of the sun. And in fact, it is what it is for a long time. Wherever we go, we're going to find what we find, right? But what we do have inside spacecraft, which is related to this, is just that like I said, the physics is there. So depending on what the properties are of the sun, and and what the composition is of the atmosphere and the surface and the density and the you know, and the temperatures that result from the, you know, that environment, you know, the way the atmosphere behaves because of the proximity to the sun and what it's made out of. All these things affect the global, you know, well, look and feel like it, right, of the planet, right? I mean, the planet is what is going to behaves the way it should. So we're, in a sense, we're able to model exoplanets. So like if you know something about the exoplanet, you know what its composition is, you know the composition of the atmosphere. If you know the certain properties, you can actually get a realistic interpretation of what the planet would look like. And then you can go down and visit that planet. So that's the cool thing that, you know, we have, and we're working on. We're trying to make that even better. We're trying to make it so you could sort of create a whole solar system of planets, and teams could do that, and they could visit each other's solar systems. And so that's kind of where we think we're headed. But yeah, but you know, I think you're touching on like the terraforming idea there, and
yes,
if we, you know, that's a much longer term prospect, is, you know, being able to modify a planet to suit us, and we'll see if we ever choose to do that.
We think about it like, and you know, and like the UAE is setting up a rover to really kind of essentially just digest as much as it can about the atmosphere and the surface of Mars, and with the intention of that information being shared globally, so that we can learn as much about, you know, in case, I mean, as you said, terraforming is quite an exhaustive and expensive, you know, undertaking for any planet. But to think about, you know, where, as Jackie's saying, like creating really smart solutions using what the environment already has, and thinking about ways to create transitions for astronauts to be able to, you know, begin some time on a planet and study the planet is pretty cool. Now I feel like if Tim was going to create a planetary system, it'd be like Tatooine. He'd be like, I want a couple of suns out there. I want like, when you think about like the about planetary construction, Tim, like what are the things that are compelling to you? Like what are the things that you feel like would resonate with students in the environment of planets? And
So I think rather than Tatooine, maybe it would be more like Camino, all water. Water is really important. You need it to drink. You need it. You can use it for fuel. And also NASA is following the water. That's where the exobiologists hope we will find life, or how prevalent life is. So I think water is key if you're going to create a planet or explore a planet like that.
When you think about like,
you feel a bit like Slarty Bartfast from Hitchhiker's Guide. You know, I can do the crinkly fiordy bits and all of that kind of stuff. But I remember one of the participants in the recent space team's mission. They said, I have lots of sand because then I'm on the beach all the time. So their whole thing was they wanted beaches everywhere.
Like Lost in Paradise, right?
It doesn't matter that you can't put a launch facility there because it will just sink, you know, like they don't think that way. But I remember when they were all doing it, thinking about Hitchhiker's Guide and you know, that whole thing about let's, you know, DIY planet is pretty cool, I think.
Yes. You know, and it's interesting too. So when you think about, like we were mentioning a little earlier, the asteroid mining, you know, one of the reasons behind mining an asteroid, I suppose, if you're traveling through space, would be to see if you can gather any sort of, you know, elements that would be helpful, water or, you know, fuel elements, or, you know, honestly, it's a piece of a planet. So it could really be almost anything composed in what you run across. I know that there was a challenge that was it the National Space Society does, I think each year, which revolves around the O'Neill colony, and they'll give the students challenges around augmentations to the O'Neill colony, and a lot of times it's asteroid mining is the augmentation that folks jump into. And I know that we saw Jeff Bezos talk about the idea of taking manufacturing off of the planet and essentially helping the planet sort of grow back by having essentially colonies that do manufacturing off planet. But obviously that's a very long-term goal rather than a short-term goal. But as you think about like short-term goals or things that seem like conceivable in a lifetime, what kind of things do you see happening in space exploration and innovation that could happen in this next lifetime?
I reckon that you'd be able to 3D print using regolith and stuff, you know, like they're already 3D printing houses in the United Arab Emirates, those kind of places. So I think, you know, if you're someone who was a bit entrepreneurial, getting a few of those 3D printing building machines up on the moon could be a bit of fun. And then you could rent them out, build your headquarters and then rent them out to people and earn a bit of cash, you know.
It'd be like Moon Minecraft. Could it be like Moon Minecraft?
It could be a bit like that, but you know, if you could imagine, I've seen they're just basically 3D printing these buildings. So I reckon, you know, be a lot of fun, right? And then what color do you want it? Could be the question.
Indeed. What sort of thing do you think?
So I think if I had to pick something, I might say space medicine. So I'm pretty sure we're going to see boots on the ground on Mars in the next few decades. But getting them the help they need, I think nanobots are going to be the thing for medicine that people aren't really aware of right now. I mean, you could swallow a pill and they can clean your blood or fix something inside, deliver your medicine. That's going to be something that we're not really thinking about now, but I think that'll be a huge benefit. As my shirt says, it's not just rocket science. Space covers medicine and physiology as well.
Let's go. What do you think, Greg?
Well, I think one thing is that we're seeing this happen right now is that, you know, space tourism is becoming a real thing. You know, we're going to see more and more people going into space, and you know, I've been asked, you know, what do I think about the new Chinese space station, and how do I, you know, do we see that as competition, or I think it's fantastic, right? I mean, now that we have another space station in orbit, you know, we can rest maybe a little easy that we're not going to lose our foothold in space because of one vehicle that, you know, needs to be replaced.
Right.
And I think this is going to grow exponentially. Like, you know, we're at a point now where about 500 people have been in space, and I, you know, would like to see 1 million people who've been in space. And there's a threshold at some point that we're going to cross where, you know, right now it's still really hard to get to space, but once it gets, you know, to a point where let's say we have 1 million people who have gone to space, it's going to be a lot less expensive and a lot more normal to go to space. And then things can really grow from there, because there'll be all kinds of opportunities to, you know, do commerce in space, do resource development in space, whether it's energy or materials or construction or what, you know, many different things. And so getting past that threshold where right now it's a novelty and getting to the point where it's normal, I'd like to see that in my lifetime.
It's been one of those things where in space the idea of partnership and collaboration has been something that's been around for generations, which is kind of great, or for decades, I should say. You know, and you were up at the ISS with Russian cosmonauts, I think, if I'm correct. Yes. Yeah. And you know, part of your daily schedule was doing essentially experiments for countries, you know, for different countries that had different kind of ideas and initiatives and things they wanted done, as well as students.
Well, and the other thing, I hate to bring this up and answer your question, but you know, the other cultural aspect of that was showing them our science fiction, which they hadn't seen. They hadn't seen Star Wars, they hadn't seen Star Trek, and it was a very important mission for me to show that to them.
Of course, of course. That's
Totally. And did they show you any of their science fiction, Greg? Did they have things like that in their culture that you hadn't seen before?
Not really, not really. But one of my crewmates became a huge Star Trek fan after that, so that was great.
That's very cool. Well, I remember like one of the things that you did that was awesome was the comparison of 2001 and what you were actually doing up at the ISS and how so many of those things crossed over to what was expressed in 2001, which is very cool.
Yeah, that was really amazing because that movie was made in 1968, right? And we were there in 2008, so a little bit past 2001, and just the ideas. I mean, actually, it was 2010, the second movie, right? The second book, when the Russians and Americans are together on a ship going out to Jupiter, and watching that, I watched that film on board a spaceship with two Russians, and
That's very cool.
it was the coolest thing.
That's very cool. So we have coming up, there's the August 9th through 14th mission that's being done with St. Jude's, which is exciting. We've got the September International Challenge, which is also very exciting. That'll be a nice sort of global mission. And that's happening, I totally didn't write down this.
The 20th, yeah.
Yeah, September 20th through the 25th, I believe.
Yep.
Correct?
That's right, yep.
And then as we look forward to doing things like in the International Challenge, Jackie, what do you find that there are different sort of focuses that students have in different regions? Greg, you and Tim, you probably also could speak to this, or are basically students kind of universal in the things that they look at when they look at space exploration and science and things?
Well, I'll jump in for a second because spending time in Australia as well as here, there's a difference that I see in some sense, in other parts of the world, people are even more excited about, space exploration. It's slightly more removed, like Tim and I directly have been involved with NASA, and it's not too far from where we live. And, kids who go to high school, around the Johnson Space Center, aren't necessarily the biggest fans because it's an everyday thing for them. It's normal for them. Whereas you get further away from NASA and further away, from the United States. I mean, obviously there's now space agencies in many different countries, but I found that the students in Australia were extremely excited about the opportunities to participate in the space program in any way, and we're really reaching, for how can I do this? How can I get involved? What can I do? What steps can I take, to get involved in? And so the thirst for it, I think, in some ways grows as you get further away from the center. So.
And I agree with you, Greg. I think if it's in your normal day-to-day existence, it just becomes a bit blasé. Whereas here, with the space agency only being 3 years old and a big push around the new space sector, our kids and our community is very excited to see how we can be involved more than what we have in the past 60 years, because we have been involved. Australia's been involved in a lot of space stuff, but often it's been in the defence sector, or often it's that with the lack of being able to communicate across such a big country, people just don't experience or hear about things. And also too, the resources that it takes to outreach into those communities, we often don't have that. So I feel the same with you, that there is a big excitement here, and it's really exciting to be able to offer space teams, but also to offer the opportunity to team up and show the world that we are really capable of doing this stuff too. And I think that's the exciting thing, to realise that we can do this stuff, that we thought what was impossible, it is possible now because we're all collaborating together.
Yeah. No, that's a really great point. As you guys, we're probably getting close to wrapping up. This has been a really, really exciting panel. As you think about things that that students can connect with? Are there resources? Are there things that are sort of outside, you know, like One Giant Leap or outside of Texas Space Consortium or Texas A&M, the space things that you would recommend students can also pursue? Because obviously, I think that's one of the things that sometimes is challenging for students, to really find places where they can connect with their passions.
I would say from the space grant side, again, every single state has a space grant, so they can reach out to those resources in their state as a first step. And then also NASA has its own programs and challenges that they run independently. And they have a lot of K through 12 programs that educators can find. So I would say students, reach out to your teachers. Teachers, reach out to your space grants.
Nice. Jackie, what do you think?
I'm more than happy if they contact me. I can and ask a few questions. I can put them on the right track, because often they're looking for something, but they don't know really what it is. So it's like if people ask me, they will contact me, for example, and say, I want to buy a drone. And I'll say, what for? What purpose is it? What do you need it for? And then I'll guide them along the way. So people might say, oh, we're looking for a robotics program, but it's how big a program they want to be involved in, how much resource they have, what their capability is. So it's not really a one size fits all. I'm more than happy to guide them in helping them out in trying to find the right fit for their kids, to make sure that it's not too difficult or not too easy, so that they get that engagement across the board. And teachers as well, teacher professional development, all of those things. There's a lot out there, but you need the quality stuff.
I'll just mention a few programs too. So, I mean, as part of Texas Space Grant, there's the SEAS program. What does that stand for again, Tim?
STEM Enhancement in Earth Sciences.
Okay. Great. So these are students who come from all over the place, I think both US and internationally, and basically participate in a summer-long program to do science research using, you know, data coming from satellites in space. It's an amazing program. Another, just as examples, another one that I've been involved with, and so have Tim and Jackie, is Zero Robotics. Which is something that we created with initially MIT and NASA. And it's a program where students program robots. They compete with each other, and ultimately they're robots that are on the space station. So the crew sets them up, and the students' algorithms are run on board the space station and compete, you know, in zero gravity. We've had teams all around the world do this. So we've done this all over the US, but all of the countries that are involved in the space program, so 16 different countries, as well as Australia. We had 50 teams in Australia at our peak a couple of years ago. And that's actually a program that's running right now again. It's a very exciting opportunity. So there's a lot of different programs that students can find out about and participate in that engages them in, you know, in space activities.
Yeah, and in addition to robotics, Scouting has a lot of STEM. They're really pushing that now as well. There's no mistaking why 2/3 of all astronauts have had Scouting experience. They get that teamwork, that leadership, that communication, all the things you get a little bit of in space teams.
That's great. Well, thank you guys. This was an excellent panel. For any of you folks who would like to demo space teams, you can go to the Future Tech Live event space. We have a demo of space teams that's in a UFO, very, very fun, cool layout. You can also learn more about space teams there. I'm going to also supply some links to One Giant Leap Australia, to Texas Space Grant Consortium, and to Space Teams itself, so that you guys can learn a bit more about the different companies and organizations. And please don't hesitate, you know, go on a space mission, learn more about space. It really is pretty exciting. Thank you guys very much, and enjoy Comic-Con at home.